So this Shabbat is the Shabbat of Shemot that we begin the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus, and we the book of Exodus really means in English that we leave Egypt, but in Hebrew the word is Shmot, which means the names of. And we'll talk about what are the names. But also, in if you translate the word of Exodus into Hebrew, the word is Geulah. Geulah, which means redemption. So what it means is that the we are moving from the book of creation. So think of a body and a soul. The Talmud tells us that these two books of Exodus and Genesis really go together. They're two parts of one story. So the story of creation cannot be complete without redemption. So when God created the world, He created it to reflect a a purpose. So when you create a body, when you create any container or anything that has a form, it needs to be serving a purpose. So the book of Genesis was the creation of the body, and the book of Exodus is the like God's blowing the his spirit into the nostrils of man to make him a full human being. That's the same thing on a bigger scale. That God is now through the book of Exodus is blowing the spirit into the body that was created in Genesis and creating a full form and a full purpose. So what is the creation? The creation was the creation of the world, but also the creation of the family of Israel, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. It was the introduction into the purpose. Now in the book of Exodus, the redemption that we're talking about is, of course, coming out of Egypt, but coming out of Egypt is not the full purpose. The later on when we hear Moses telling Pharaoh, "Let my people go," he tells Pharaoh, "Let my people go," and usually the people like to quote just this part because it's just short and catchy. But the full verse is "Let my people go so they can worship me." That's what God said, which means that it's not enough to run away from, but it's to run towards something. So we leave Egypt, the house of slavery. That's what Egypt is called in the Bible, house of slavery. It's not just that Israel was enslaved, other nations were enslaved as well. It was a concept, it was a methodology of enslavement. So the whole mindset was one person above another. We are coming out of Egypt to build the house of God. And actually, the book of Exodus is divided to pretty much two equal parts. The first one is the whole story of leaving Egypt and the 10 plagues, and then the Mount Sinai, the event in Mount Sinai is kind of the pivot point, and it's its own, of course, event. And then right after that, the second half of the book of Exodus is building the house of God, is building the Mishkan, the tent of meeting in the desert, which means that going from the house of slavery, that system of enslavement, the mindset of one person above another, has to go through the Ten Commandments to pivot it into the house of God. And the house of God is the house of freedom. It's exactly the opposite. It's flipping the Egyptian pyramid. The Egyptian pyramid means that one person is above and everybody is enslaved. And if you are somehow poor or needy, or you have any weakness, you are being enslaved. That is taken advantage of. If in the house of God, when you're needy, when you are somehow have weakness, we the people, right? It's not one person at the top, it's the opposite. It brings the power to the people, and then the leader is a servant to the people, not a dictator, not an oppressor. The opposite. The mandate that a leader in the house of God has is to take care of the weak, the poor, the tired, and so forth. So it literally flipping the Egyptian pyramid, and then the rest of the book of Exodus is about building the tent of meeting, that it's called literally the tent of meeting, where we meet each other, of course, but where we meet God. And that's the structure of redemption, that it's going from oppression into freedom. That's the definition of redemption throughout the Bible. It's just now we are reading for the first time about the true redemption from the perspective of God. Another thing about the structure of the book of Exodus is that we have to learn something that we can take with us. A real redemption is not a local redemption, but it's a universal redemption. It's something that we can take wherever we are. And if you think about it, this is already planting the seeds of the ultimate redemption for the people of Israel. Why? Because what the book of Exodus teaches us is how to first of all accept the Ten Commandments, the word of God, the law, in the desert, where it's not a specific place, it's a wilderness. And then build a house of God in the wilderness, and it's a house of God that is movable, that we take with us on our back. And this is the most important thing, because the question is always, why did God give the Torah to the people of Israel in the book of Exodus in the desert? Why didn't he wait until we entered the land and then give us, of course, the Torah in Jerusalem or in the land of Israel? But if you think about it, first of all, the Torah is something that God wanted to give to the world. And we, the people of Israel, are the custodian of, of the Torah, and we are supposed to impart it on the rest of the world through living it ourselves, being very particular, but reflecting a universal light, to be the light upon the nations. And when the nations will see us living a certain way, it will influence them. Again, not by coercion, but by persuasion, or by just an example. The word Torah means light and teaching. So we teach by light. That's why when we eventually build the house of God, everything about the house of God operates like light. The Aron, the first thing that we build is the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant, literally, Ark, Aron means the container of Or, container of light. And it reflects it all from the heart outwardly. So imagine that if we have not received those tools, how to accept the Ten Commandments, how to build the house of God, how to travel with it in the wilderness. If we have not received that, we would not survive today. Why? Because of a simple thing. The people of Israel now exist for about 4,000 years. If we count from Abraham, it's about 4,000 years. Imagine that more than half of that we were in exile. So we needed from the beginning to learn how to take our faith and travel with it. One of the examples that is given is that we are like the turtle, that we travel with our house on the back. And interestingly, very interestingly, the way that the turtle's back, right, has those squares on the top. The Jewish mysticism says this is like the breastplate on the heart of the high priest. Those squares, the 12 squares that symbolize the 12 tribes. But what it means is that we take the Torah, of course, the 12, the people of Israel, we travel together like the turtle. So we travel also like the turtle. We travel slowly. We don't have any commandment to travel fast. Clearly, we were supposed to travel for about 2-3 weeks and arrive the land of Israel, but it took us 40 years. So that was definitely a circuitous way and a slow way, because we are like and God says you are maasai adai lehitpaer. You are almost like I'm cooking you. You're like a delicious dish that I cook you slowly. So it takes time and phases. And that is the last thing about the introduction is exactly that. That just like slavery, and we will start looking at the slavery today and how the people of Israel went not just downward to Egypt. That's the Torah always describes the traveling to Egypt as going down, and of course going down meaning you're going down spiritually, but also going down into slavery, into something that would suck you in. So how do you do that? How does it happen that a very smart people allow themselves to become slaves somehow and not leave? So we'll look at that, but it's the point is that it's stages. There are stages in that. So just like slavery comes in stages and we sink into it in little by little, redemption also comes that way. It's a process that we climb up from. And if you think about the coming out of Egypt and Passover, right? The celebration of Passover, we start counting 49 days of the Omer. We count the Omer for 49 days until the 50th day, what Christians will call Pentecost. But
Mm.
that's where it comes from. That from leaving Egypt to Pentecost, the 50th day, which always symbolizes freedom and redemption. How do we know that 50 is the redemption and freedom? Because it comes in a different format in other places. For example, the Jubilee. The Jubilee is a year, the 50th year, after 7 cycles of Shemitah, of the 7 sabbatical years. And it symbolizes freedom, that everybody goes back to, all the slaves are released, all the lands go back to their original owners, and there's a peace in the land. So that 50th day symbolized the same way. Now, the rabbis projected that day um, on another verse that is in the Torah, that the Israelites received the Torah in the desert on the third month after leaving Egypt. So it's about it works out this way, that the 50th day is the third month, because they left in the middle of the book the month of Nisan, and then we have Nisan, Sivan, Iyar. So in the 6th of Iyar, we receive the Torah. But it doesn't say specifically that we receive the Torah on the 50th day. But the point is that in order to receive the Torah, to be redeemed, you have to climb up from slavery. And there's 49 steps that we have to take.
That's a movie.
So the 49 step that we take out, the Talmud tells us that there was 49 steps that the Israelite took down into Egypt, into the physical Egypt, but into the spiritual Egypt, or the lack of spirituality in Egypt. And if we would have gone one more step into the 50th step, we would have not been able to come back out of it. So God took us right in the kind of the last moment, and redemption also comes in the last moment. That's always the case. I don't know about your life, and but I have seen that in my life too. That somehow God waits until um, everything seems to be lost, and then he comes in and swoops things up, because that is the point. The point of the Exodus, the point of the 10 plagues, the whole struggle with Pharaoh is to show Pharaoh that we are chosen by God, and God is the mover, the prime mover in this world, not Pharaoh. It's hard for us to really internalize it, that Pharaoh, as the Talmud tells us, what felt like he created the world. He would go down to the Nile, and he would hide the fact that he is a human being that needed to go, relieve himself physically. So he would kind of hide, and people saw him as a demigod, or as a god. So in the 10 plagues and all the conversations with Pharaoh, God shows him that who is really moves the world. So it's hard for us to understand. Like, really, the people bought that he's like a god? Can't they see he's a human being? But if you think about it, in even in today's, there are a few countries that probably, if we look at North Korea, maybe Iran, now they're finally rebelling again. In all these dictatorships, with when you walk on the street and you have these humongous statues of the leaders, and you're commanded to put the portrait or the pictures of the leaders in your home. And so yes, you could be influenced that way and brainwashed that they are above humanity. So that's the case. So okay, let's begin with reading the text and see how we got there. So it says that the people who came down to Egypt, that's how the book begins. These are the names of the children of Israel who came into Mitzrayim, that went down, and um, and then there's a list of all the tribes, and then it tells us that it was 70 people. With Joseph in Egypt, it was 70 people. And then the turnaround begins. It says, and Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. Okay. And then it says, the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So that's a good thing. But the problem is that in every anti-Semitic episode in the history of the Jewish people, that's how it starts. That we come somewhere. Sometimes we were even invited to come, and then we succeed, and then somebody doesn't like it and starts a blood libel that we somehow are taking over, and then measures are taken. So what happens here? Now there arose a new king over Mitzrayim, over Egypt, who knew not Joseph. Okay, so a new king that didn't know Joseph. So that is already a very blinking red light. Why? Because how can it be that a nation wouldn't know the person who saved it? He literally saved Egypt, and he made Egypt successful in the way it was. So he either really he was on TikTok all day and really didn't know history, which we can see today of what, of course, happened at on campuses, and you see students that may not really they're maybe just ignorant about where the Jewish people come from and who we are. But on the other hand, it could be, and of course, I subscribe more to that opinion, that he just didn't want to know. And when you start erasing history and pushing out the people, so we say the victor always writes the history. So he's starting to rewrite history when he knew not Joseph. And he tells his people, look, these people, the children of Israel, are more and mightier than we. Now, in Hebrew, this is it kind of lost in translation, but in Hebrew, he is the first person that calls the Jewish people a nation, a people of. Because when the last time we heard about the people of Israel, They were the family of 70 people who came down to Egypt. But this is not, that's not the case. At this point, they're multiplied, and he calls us a nation. Now, everything that we read here in the story, it repeats itself in throughout Jewish history. This is the first time that we see anti-Semitic action against the people of Israel, but this is also a foreshadowing. This puts down the sorry the template for anti-Semitism in the for the rest of the Jewish history. So what he calls us a nation, sometimes we don't know who we are, right? And we keep kind of not understanding how powerful we are, but other people see us as that. So he says to his people, let us deal wisely with them, meaning let's try to outsmart them, because he knew that if he would be out front, would say, let's kill these people, let's do something, let's push them out, that would not work. You have to do it in stages. And the word for hard labor, which we'll see later, in Hebrew means parech. The word is pronounced parech, but the Talmud tells us it's a combination of two words, pe rach, a soft mouth. That's how you lure people into slavery. It's like cooking the frog, very slowly until the water's boiling and it's too late for it to escape. So how would the dealing wisely with them be? Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built the Pharaoh's treasure city, namely Pitom and Ramses. So they let them build cities. But the Talmud says that there's a midrash that tells us that in the beginning, the way they started it is like telling them, listen, we have a big project for you. You are special and we need your help for that. And in the beginning, Pharaoh himself came to the work site and to work with them. They were doing it together. And then little by little, he started separating them from the other people. And then, of course, also made them work harder and harder and harder until they really were stripped of their time and resources and just were not able to rebel even if they wanted to. So it says here, and Mitzrayim made the children of Israel serve with rigor. So that word rigor is baparech, perach, as we said, the soft mouth. It was a process of luring them one step at a time. I remember when I was working in the corporate world and people were trying to climb up the corporate ladder. And that was, of course, it's a very prestige thing to do. To everybody wants to climb the corporate ladder, and I remember that I was already working part time and I was finishing my studies and I remember one of the rabbis telling us that climbing the corporate ladder is to just become a bigger slave every time you step up another step in the ladder. You become just a bigger slave until you are the top of the pyramid and you have no time for yourself. You are all consumed with work. so you get more money. But if you have no time for yourself or anything else, then you are just a bigger slave. So that's what they did. Little by little, took them away from themselves and from their time and from their families and their children. And then when you do that, when you separate a person from their families like that, the next step, and they made their lives so bitter with hard bondage in mortar and in brick and in all matter of bondage in the field. So anything that they could tell them to do, they and not provide for them, they did. And their bondage wherein they made them serve was with rigor. So again, it repeats that word bafarech in rigor. And then he saw that it wasn't enough. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the names of one was Shifra and the other one Puah. We'll talk about the names a little later. And he said, when you see the newborn, if it's a male, you should kill it, and if it's a girl, you should she should live. But the midwives feared God and did not, as the king of Mitzrayim commanded them. They saved the men, children alive. So, and then the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and saved the men, children alive, or the male child?" And the midwives said, "These women are like the animals of the wild animals. They just they give birth right away, and we didn't even have time to get there." So they delivered before the midwives come to them. So God, it says that God rewarded those two midwives in he built houses for them. He gave them houses, and of course, what it means, houses is gives them, of course, large families, so just like it's a measure for measure. They've given a lot, and now they saved lives, so they are getting lives, so they will be fruitful and multiply themselves. So now Pharaoh increases the commandment, and he say, so now Pharaoh charged all his people. So he knew that it's not going to work by just assigning the Hebrew midwives. So he says to all his people, so now this is the first decree. Think of Germany. Think of places in Yemen or Iraq, that there was this decree of the land that Jews could not work in certain profession, or Jews cannot be in certain areas, and they should be now coming and living in only in ghettos. So this is the first decree. It says to his people, every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you should save alive. So he makes it now the law of the land. So now there's a midrash. The story now shifts into the personal story of Moses and his family. But the idea now is that there's a midrash that fills in the gap in the middle. And the gap is what happens between the Moses Pharaoh's decree, and that the next the first verse in chapter 2, where it says, "And there went a man from the house of Levi, and took the wife, a daughter of Levi. And these are Moses's parents. So the Midrash tells us that what happens in between was that when the decree happened that all the male children would be thrown into the Nile, Moses' father divorced his wife. He said, I don't want to be responsible for having a son that I would have to then kill, essentially. So Miriam, Moses' daughter, sister, the daughter of course, the father, says to his father, you are worse than Pharaoh. If you're divorcing mommy because you don't want to have any more children, you are worse than Pharaoh. Why? Because Pharaoh only decreed upon the females. You are decreeing over everybody. So she was kind of the first feminist too. She was a very strong woman too, as we know. So he listens to her. So what he does, he goes back and marries his wife again so he can be with her. And then the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was goodly child, she hid him 3 months. So the question is, what is goodly? There's many midrashim, many stories in the Talmud explaining what exactly did they see in Moses when he was born that was good. So one answer is that he was already circumcised, and that's a sign of righteousness. That if a baby is born circumcised, the second is that he literally reflected light out of his face. So he already had that hidden light reflected. And then there's another interpretation that says that he was a complete child. He was born, you know how when some children are born and you look at them and you see a person already. They're fully formed. So that's kind of an amazing thing. So she saw that he was already fully formed. So they knew something about this child is different, and he's not like everybody else, and so she hides him for 3 months. But when she can't hide him anymore, she puts him in a a basket, and she put him in the Nile. But they put him where the reeds are. So it means that he doesn't go into the flow of the river. He stays by the river bank. And his sister Miriam stands there to watch what will happen to him. And as it happens, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walk along by the riverside. And when she saw the box among the bushes, the rushes, she sent her maid to fetch it. Now, the word maid in Hebrew can be interpreted in different ways, because the word in Hebrew is amata, which could also mean her amma. Amma is her hand. Amma is from the elbow to the tip of the fingers. So that is a measurement of also amma. That was the like a yard, or a foot. But this was the ancient measurement of amma, and she sent her amma. So the question is, did she send her maidservant, or did she herself extend her hand and take it herself? Now, why is this important? Because anyways, a person's messengers like themselves, that is the halacha, that's the Jewish law anyway, that if somebody sends a person to do something for them, it's like they did it themselves. If I tell you, here, take this $20 and go give it to the homeless, it's like I gave it. Right? You get credit for being a messenger, but I get the credit of giving, just as I would give somebody in their hand. So, but what's important here is whether she sent her ama or maidservant or extended her own hand. It says that the Midrash said that when she started with her extending her hand, miraculously her hand extended beyond its form. So it literally extended physically. So it was became 6 feet long, and she was able to approach Moshe. What it's trying to tell us that she made an effort, that she extended the tishlach et amatash. It wasn't that she just was right in front of it and she just picked it up from the ground. She had to do something to extend herself. And of course, what she had to do, she must have known that this was a Hebrew child. And just by taking him out of the river, she's already risking, or maybe because she's the daughter of Pharaoh, she's not risking herself, her life, but she is definitely going against her father's decree. So that is already, it's showing us that she is a righteous person. She stood up for her father's wicked decree. Now, you'll notice that this story of redemption begins with all women. This is a the Chumash, the book of women. And the Talmud tells us that because of righteous women, the Israel people were redeemed because they did things that defied the decrees. They were very courageous, and their spirit was stronger than even the men who, of course, were enslaved. So it was, kind of different, of course, but they did not allow the slavery and the situation around them to really push them down. So, like the maidservants who did not adhere to Pharaoh's decree, uh, Miriam, according to the Midrash, that told her father, "You are worse than Pharaoh if you don't." If you stay away from our mother, and of course now the daughter of Pharaoh, and then we'll see even later what happens. So this is a story about women's courage that saves the people of Israel. So she takes Moses, and she opens the basket, and she sees, now the translation sees says a child, but the word in Hebrew, and that's why the Midrash, one of the opinions that when his parents saw him right away, they saw that he was fully formed, because the word that is describing him now is na'ar, a na'ar boche, a crying lad. That's the translation of na'ar. So he was only 3 months old, but she sees a na'ar. So she sees him crying, and she had compassion on him. So she's a compassionate person. And maybe this is a story about women because women have extra compassion that men do not have. Women are called women or the definition of a woman in the Jewish law is one who has a womb. So of course in English it translates nicely, a womb, a woman, but the but in Hebrew the word doesn't necessarily sound the same, but that's the definition. But the word for womb is compassion, is mercy, rechem. It's the same thing as rachamim, compassion, mercy. So she has compassion uh, on him, and she says, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And then Miriam comes out, of course, of the reeds, and she said, then she said to the daughter of Pharaoh, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you of the Hebrew women that may nurse the child for you?" So it's all for you, right? So the only way to save the child is to give give him to the to Pharaoh's daughter. And of course, I know many stories of children who were saved in the Holocaust because they were given to non-Jews. And then the daughter of Pharaoh said, "Yes, definitely go and get me the." Uh, in Hebrew, it meyaneket is someone who has just gave birth and can nurse the child. And of course, there were many of them because all these women who gave birth to male child and then had to put him in the Nile, and of course could not nurse them. So there were plenty of those. But she goes, of course, and she calls her mother. So her mother, Moses's mother, is the one who is now nursing him. And then after he finishes nursing and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and became her son. And she called his name Moshe. And she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." So this is now, of course, names, and this is the name of this book, the book of names, Shemot. The essence of anything is its name. So it's interesting that the Pharaoh's daughter calls Moshe his Hebrew name. So, but the conjugation here is wrong because Moshe, she says, because I drew him out of the water. So, if that's the case, she should have called him Nimsha because he was drawn out of the water. But she calls him Moshe, which means a person who draws others out of the water. And of course, this is the essence of Moshe is not that was withdrawn out of the water, but that he will be now the one who would take other people out. But he himself had to feel that somebody took him out. I always think about it when I think about the state of Israel and how the soldiers in Israel sacrifice their lives all the time. Of course, American soldiers do the same thing, but the issue in America, which is different, is that there's no conscription anymore in America. So it really is almost like a paid army. But but in Israel, because it's still everybody has to serve, every generation feels that the generation before them fought and died and sacrificed their lives so they could live. and so they could live peacefully and securely. And of course, I feel that too, that if I think about what happened even from the Holocaust or from the exile of the Jews in Arab countries and all the aliyah, the immigration to Israel, and how they had to fight everybody, and then the establishment of Israel, and then the Six-Day War, and on and on and on. Every Israeli child was born either during, before, or after a war. So we all have that feeling that somebody fought for us, and now it's our turn to fight for other people. So Moshe had to be drawn out to feel that strongly about drawing other people out. And that's how he gets his name. And of course, that's a projection for his future. So he grows up and he comes out of the palace. Now he's a prince. He's a prince of Egypt, and he comes out, but he has the same compassion, and he sees the burden of his brothers. He knows, of course, he's a Hebrew. There's no way that he doesn't know, and he sees that, and he sees that one Egyptian man hitting a taskmaster, hitting a Hebrew person. It says a Hebrew, one of his brothers. So he feels that connection to his brothers, and this verse. The next verse is a very interesting verse because it says, "And he looked this way and that, and when he saw that there is no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." Now, that is a if you read this verse in a simple way, you can think that he looked around to see that there's nobody seeing him, there are no witnesses, and that's why he did it. Well, maybe on the simple level, but on the deeper level, and that is where also um, the mechanism of redemption comes from. You need a person to start a revolution or start an evolution, to start something. It always starts with one person. The Hanukkah story started with one family, but it really one person that says enough is enough. I'm not willing to take this anymore. The Arab Spring, if you remember, started with a man in Algeria who it wasn't Algeria, right? Who set himself on fire, and it started this whole revolution. So um, when it says that he saw no man, it means that he looked to see who is there anybody there that sees that it's not right that this man is hitting this poor slave, which means that there's an injustice here. Can anybody come to his rescue? And nobody did. And he says that is where it says, when there's no man, you be the man, right? So you become the person. So when he saw there's nobody here to help, he was that. So then he goes the second day and he sees two Hebrews fight. So I mean, you see that all the time with the Jewish people, right? We complain about anti-Semitism, but then we have our internal conflicts, and I've thought about it for a long time in many ways. That on the other hand, when I went to when I was on Columbia campus, I saw the ignorance and I saw the anti-Semitism, and I produced this film and really dedicated my time and effort to that. But then you see all these internal conflicts in the Jewish people, and then you say, so where is it? So what do we have to do here? But then I realized it's both. We live in a split screen reality that we have to fight anti-Semitism because that's wrong, but we also have to live the reality of intra-Semitism, of internal conflict, and that's the story of Hanukkah. The Jews didn't just fight the Greeks; they fought the Hellenized Jews from within. So that's already the first rabbi, Moses, had to deal with those two realities, that there's anti-Semitism, but there's also internal conflict. So what does he do? He's asking the person who's hitting his friend. He said, "Why are you doing this?" The fellow Hebrew. And the aggressor says to Moses, "Who are you? Who made you the prince and judge over us? You have intent to kill me, and you have, like, you killed the Egyptian." And Moses faded and said, "Surely this thing is known." Okay, so again, you can read it on the simple level by saying, when he says, "Oh, it's known," meaning that they now know that I killed the Egyptian yesterday. But the deeper meaning of it is what is known, as the Talmud explains. Moses understood why the Hebrews are enslaved. They're enslaved because of the internal conflict. And if you look at Jewish history, when we are divided from within, this is when our enemy steps in. And that happens all the way even to October 7th. When we were divided about the judicial reform, and it came to a place where Jews were interrupting Yom Kippur prayers in the middle of Tel Aviv and denying other Jews from praying on Yom Kippur. That is the bottom of that's rock bottom. So one, you can say it's good because that's rock bottom. We've arrived there, and we can only step up from there. And of course, in the past 2 years after October 7th, you see that Israel has come a lot more together. And of course, there's still divisions and all that, but there's something that happened as a result that is really hopeful. So he sees that, and then he says, now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from before Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So he goes to Midian. He sits by a well, and of course, the Talmud tells us that a well is always an indication of Torah, meaning that even though he fled, he still were looking for a source of Torah, the source of water, the living water. And he found it. He found whatever he's going to find is going to be by the well. And he sees there were a Midianite shepherdess that came there, and the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. So the male shepherd came and pushed them out, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And so we're going to kind of come to the conclusion of this story. This is why Moshe was chosen to be the leader of the Jewish people, the first rabbi, the first or the redeemer of the people to take them out of Egypt because he is compassionate. He cannot stand on the side and sees the injustice. And the Talmud tells us for anything like that, you need to see three times. There's the concept of chazakah, a stronghold, that is three times. If somebody does something once, okay, it happened. Second time, coincidence. A third time is a pattern. So it could be for good or for bad. But Moshe showed us for the third time, and not just for the third time, but in different scenarios. And what are the different scenarios? One, when he saw anti Semitism, an Egyptian hitting a Hebrew. Then the second time, two Hebrews fight. And then the third one, two non Hebrews. So he is, as a human being, is a compassionate, but also a person that intervenes, that has the capacity or the audacity or the courage, whatever word you want to choose for that, that he is not going to stay an idle observer for injustice. And I remember Ali Wiesel, that I had the honor of sitting behind him for many years in synagogue, when he said the only all you need for a an oppressor to win is for good people to stay on the sideline and not decide. So and in the high holidays, I told the story about a man who just didn't want to intervene, didn't want to take a side, and he goes up to heaven and he's actually placed in hell. And he says to God, "Why are you putting me in hell? I didn't do anything. I always try to kind of be on the fence." And then the devil comes up and says, "I own the fence." So that really is what Moshe has, this compassion and passion, and he's just a good-hearted person who is willing to sacrifice his life to save and to correct injustice. So the rest of the story is that, of course, he marries one of the daughters, Tzipporah, and he dwelt in the desert for, some say 40 years, some say 60 years, because we know he was a young man when he came out and from the palace and saw the injustice. And then when we see him again, when God calls on him in the desert, he's 80 years old. So he was either 40 or 20 when he fled. But I believe that he was 40 years in the desert, because that's a foreshadow of the Israelites. So he probably was about when he left, it was probably around 40, and then he was 80 when God calls on him. And then, of course, the whole story of going back to Egypt. And there was another episode with a woman here when they go back to Egypt finally, and they have a newborn male child, and he's about to die. And Zipporah, his wife, Moses' wife, circumcises the baby because she understands that he has to come into the covenant. She circumcises him, and then he lives. And then they arrive Egypt, of course, and then the whole story of the 10 plagues and coming out and so forth. So that would be next Shabbat. We'll start with the whole story of the plagues and that process.